Flyaway Peter is a novella written by David Malouf, an Australian poet from Brisbane with Lebanese Jewish heritage. The novella was published in 1982 by Vintage. It is set on the Gold Coast of Australia in the Currumbin Bird Sanctuary, which still stands to this day, from 1914 to 1918, the same years as the First World War. The text focuses on a man called Jim Sadler, who admires birds. He works for a gentleman named Ashley Crowther, who also admires birds. At the outbreak of war, Jim signs up to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force. Ashley does too, but they do not meet again until further in the text. Jim partakes in many battles in the war that we don't get too much detail on until his death sequence. The novella ends in the perspective of Miss Imogen Harcourt, who also admired birds, but took on a new perspective at the end of the text when she photographed a surfer in the waves. The novella is focused on a time where Australia was a very young nation, having only just federated in 1901 and was still manufacturing the Australian identity, rather than just being a British convict colony. Australian nationalism was very minute prior to the Great War. Symbols like the Eureka Stockade and its flag, the kangaroo and other local animals were the only source of national pride that hadn't depended on the convict or pioneering colonial past. The First World War and specifically the Gallipoli Campaign were the first times Australians fought under the flag of the Commonwealth of Australia. The Southern Cross on a red background with the Union Jack in the corner. Australian troops built the Australian identity while at war, showing the world their fierceness and bravery, the same traits Nazi German soldiers would fear in the Second World War, even legendary Panzer commander Erwin Rommel, who had to fend off a small Australian holdout in Tobruk during the Second World War. In Chapter 5, page 37, a prostitute who Jim had spent the night with says, "I reckon you'll be joining up." Jim neither agreed nor disagreed, but did ask why he should. The prostitute states that if she were a man, she'd enlist and fight, as it was a big opportunity. Fighting was seen as an opportunity for men to prove their strength, bravery, and fierceness. The war also provided many jobs to men who either didn't work or didn't enjoy their occupations. Even some women had yearned to fight, but they were not allowed to, as at the time, female soldiers weren't implemented due to cultural and physical stereotypes, which deemed warfare a masculine domain and a woman's place was within the home with the children. Men fight in wars to activate adrenaline, thrill, and place themselves into extreme high-stakes situations that raise their awareness and senses. Warfare allows men to express their masculinity, camaraderie, dominance, and aggression. Biology suggests that men have psychological desires for competition and violence rooted in evolutionary efforts to assert dominance. Birds are mentioned almost constantly throughout the text, specifically in the first couple of chapters. Jim's admiration for birds tells us a lot about his personality. He is gentle, caring, and careful, just like the birds. Jim doesn't take heavy risks. He thinks before his actions and tries his absolute best even in the most disadvantaged situations. Jim also tends to struggle with reassurance and talking. The birds can also symbolize the migration of thousands of Australians, New Zealanders, and other British subjects from their homelands to battlefields in Egypt, the Ottoman Empire, and France. Birds migrate based on seasons, some staying in areas around Scandinavia for one part of the year, before making their journey down to places like Australia and South America. A key detail in the migration of birds that doesn't really apply to Jim is that they always come back. They represent continuity. Sadly, while nature moves on, Jim's journey does not. The continuity of the birds also directly connects to the title of the novella, Flyaway Peter, which comes from a nursery rhyme called Two Little Dicky Birds that goes, "Two little dicky birds sitting on a wall, one named Peter, one named Paul. Fly away Peter, fly away Paul, come back Peter, come back Paul." In the rhyme, both birds come back. In the novella, only one bird comes back, assuming that Ashley and Jim are birds. Jim's death sequence seems to start at the beginning of chapter 14 and lasts about 2 or 3 whole chapters. Personally, when I read the novella, I was given outside knowledge that Jim would die, but when reading his death sequence, I could tell that it was written to be slightly confusing. Packed again into a cattle truck, pushed in hard against the wall, in the smell of what he now understood. The start to the second paragraph of chapter 14 on page 106 sounds simple, unmeaningful, and rather normal. The text explains his immovability, and the reader would be sent on a journey through Jim's thoughts. Jim was conscious, according to the text. He could wonder and question the morals, ethics, and systems that the war unfolded. Even dead, Jim can see, the text explaining what he sees through his thoughts. Between Jim's death sequence, we also get the only chapter in the text where we focus primarily on Ashley Crowther, who was an officer. This small part of the novella shows us the similarities and contrasts between the two roles, Jim as an infantryman and Ashley as an officer. Jim's death is concluded in chapter 17, By then, the reader should be able to comprehend that Jim has passed away and is now having his 7 minutes of brain function before total death. In this chapter, Jim is led by Ashley to a forest that was previously mentioned in the text, where a man was seen digging for no reason. That man connects almost perfectly as Jim begins to see Clancy, who had died much earlier on. Jim joins a line of thousands of men who are digging to reach the other side. David Malouf's slow and well-written Death of Jim displays the theme of transition as we slowly see Jim go from possibly alive and dying on a cattle truck to dreaming about a field and digging to the other side with his fellow mates who died before him. To conclude, Fly Away Peter by David Malouf is a very intriguing read with many areas of symbolism. The novel dives into the many emotions and feelings that come with the horrors of war. The main characters in the text are well detailed and their stories explained with heavy emphasis and many symbols. The text describes a time where Australia and its people were developing a sense of national identity, rather than being seen as unimportant British subjects. The birds in the text represent the migration of soldiers and the idea of continuity within nature. Many soldiers, many people, wouldn't have been part of the continuity of nature. Their corpses left to rot on battlefields spanning the beaches of Gallipoli, the fields of France, and the deserts of the Sinai Peninsula. Life for others who survived or stayed back home would go on. Many families now having to live without their significant males, and many jobs to be filled by the new female working class. Australia, its people, its industry and its future were reshaped in a disadvantage that they would conquer through and adapt to, as they would soon have to fight again.